Hello and welcome back to Searching for Service, brought to you by Rotary District 5950. I'm your host, Kelly Kirk.
I'm Joe Kirk.
And I'm Chad Larson.
Before we welcome our guest, Chad's going to remind us of our show's sponsorship.
We want to thank Russell Hampton Companies for sponsoring the show, the #1 printer for rotary gear in the world, or licensed rotary gear, I should say. If you're watching online, you can see some of the swag they've sent us. From tumblers, cutting board, hats, you name it. They can help you with your club badges, really anything rotary related. Or if you run a business or you need other printing needs, they can also help you with that. Check them out at russellhampton.com.
And remember, 10% of your purchase for Rotary gear goes back to Rotary. It's kind of a cool little deal.
Nice little plug, guys. Thank you. Want to welcome you, Michael.
Good morning.
How are you?
Or afternoon, I guess it is
Afternoon, now. Yes. Afternoon. We're happy to have you on and have you share a little bit more about Camp Enterprise.
I look forward to it.
Well, let's start off with first, where are you from?
I was originally born in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. And I've been a Minnesotan for a little over 20 years, which is shocking nonetheless. I arrived here back in 2002. My wife worked for Cargill at the time, and we were moved here from Europe to take a small gig here in Minnesota that we thought we'd be here for 3 years, and then we'd move on somewhere else. And I've been stuck here ever since.
Here you are.
Stuck here ever since, happily.
Where did you guys live in Europe before you came here?
We lived in Amsterdam. My wife worked there for 7 years. And I joined her for the last, not quite 2. We weren't married at the time, and was over there with her. And then we realized for her career, the growth for her, she needed to come back to the States. So she took a sort of corporate position back at the headquarters for Cargill. And that's what brought us to Minnesota. And then I was able to find my own career path. And then we realized, well, we live in Edina. We got a house in Edina and thought we were just going to be there a short time, but we lived 15 minutes away from everything. And it was like, great careers were happening. And then when we realized we want to start a family, it's like, wow, this is a pretty great place to do so.
And I call it the Edina bubble.
Yeah. Well, it's really weird is that, when you're not a native of Minnesota, Minnesota is a really wonderful place, but it's not so easy for a non-native person.
Correct.
And you end up being connected to a lot of other non-natives before you have kids.
Yeah.
And then once you have kids, then it kind of blossoms into that bubble you're talking about where you're really more connected from that standpoint.
Yeah.
What was it like living abroad? A lot of the people that are on here or have done youth exchange, and they talk a lot about how living abroad really widens your perspective on life.
Yeah. So for me, I was already in my late 20s when I moved over there. And so I was already in kind of my early mid-career. I was making a transition from an entrepreneurial venture that I was doing. It was really hard. My wife, my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, she would leave the apartment at 7 a.m. She would not return until 7 p.m. I'm in a foreign country. I'm in a little bitty apartment. I don't know anybody. I don't know the language, so on and so forth. And I needed to try to find opportunities for myself. So it was a really isolating sort of environment. But Cargill was really great. They really supported me as a kind of a domestic partner. They supported me with a visa. They supported me with language lessons, so on and so forth. And so I was able to slowly try to get going. And the beautiful part, at least being in the Netherlands, is the Dutch are just incredibly kind and welcoming and very friendly people. So I tried to navigate through that as much as I could, but it was challenging for someone who's a people person, someone who likes to engage with people. Being in a small apartment every day without any kind of personal touches with people was challenging. So it was
prepped you for Minnesota.
Right. But at the same time, being in the city center of Amsterdam is the place that you live, where you have to go to the grocery store almost every day to get food. I became, the house husband. I was the cook and I was the cleaner and I was that kind of stuff. And then I was the title I cherished the most was I was her luggage boy. She traveled for work. She was a salesperson. And so she traveled throughout Europe for work. Not all the time, but often I would go with her and she'd be off working and I'd be off visiting different places and so on and so forth. So it was really kind of cool from that standpoint. What's really hard for us to think about today is that this is back in the late 90s, early 2000. Does anybody remember how much it used to cost for an international phone call?
Phone cards.
Phone
But
card, you had the
not
special
international.
like 10-digit discount code numbers that you had to dial into
Yeah.
before you did whatever. I mean, we're talking like couple dollars a minute to call. So
Yeah.
you were much more isolated. The internet was there, but it wasn't big. You could do a
Yeah.
little bit of instant messaging and stuff like that. So not being in a place that you know anyone and all the people that you know are back 7-10 hour difference back in the United States, it's really expensive to talk to people, made it just that much more isolating. But what's really cool is I ended up doing some strategic consulting for an entrepreneurial firm. It's like a joke. There was a Dutchman, an American, and a British guy walk into a bar. This is like this. This was like this IT entrepreneurial venture, and they were struggling with some strategic planning issues that they were having. And so I kind of came in as the consultant to try to help guide them through that process. And so once you start doing some of those things, you started to have more activities, more engagement with the people. But living there was an absolute dream. We miss it considerably. My wife and my daughter were just back in Amsterdam back earlier in the spring. She took my daughter for the first time to visit it
Exciting.
and experience that. Yeah, so it was kind of cool.
Well,
Very
that was
exciting.
like your first little bit of serving. You got to serve your wife and
Yeah.
help her.
Good
That's
So-
stuff
an
for sure.
yeah.
amazing way to serve too.
It
Right,
is.
Michael?
Yeah. Well, the key part is that me being the cook, right, is a laugh unto itself, just because my growing up, I was the pickiest eater, didn't eat anything, didn't like a lot of things, and so on and so forth. And what I always say is that what really helped bring me out of my shell about that was as I became an adult, a young adult, I realized like, oh, if I want to be attracted and to be engaged with people that I might have a relationship with, I don't want to be this sort of really small kind of person.
Mhm.
And so I had to expand my horizons, and this allowed me to expand them even further. So it was a really kind of a great experience from that standpoint.
Wonderful. So was it when you came back to the States and specifically Minnesota that you got tapped into Rotary?
No, actually, I did not discover Rotary until only a few years ago.
Oh.
I said all along that I wish that I had discovered Rotary in those first few years of
Yeah.
coming to Minnesota, and how much better off I would have been if that had been
Mm.
the case. The ability to be connected with people, having a purpose, doing service in the community, and so on and so forth. So I didn't find Rotary until about 4 years ago. Tom and Catherine Gump are good friends. Actually, Catherine and my wife worked together at Cargill for many years, so
Oh,
we've known
okay.
them for forever. And it wasn't until
Tom? Who's Tom?
I know.
Yeah.
Name
I heard
dropping.
he's like kind of a big
Yeah,
deal.
kind of a name drop. Sorry. But that it was kind of as I was doing some things. My service for the community actually started before Rotary with the city of Edina.
Okay.
I started actually working as a citizen volunteer in one of their commissions. So that was the Heritage Preservation Commission, and I ended up becoming the chair of that for almost about 8 years. So I actually kind of got to know Tom a little bit more because he was doing stuff with I think it was the Planning Commission, and he was on some other commission at the time. This is how I met Jim Hovland and Mary Brindle and so on and so forth. And so my service started going that direction. And then it wasn't until I was thinking about running for the Edina School Board that then Catherine is actually the one who kind of said to me, well, you should really come to Rotary and meet people both at the noon club and at the morning club. I think it'd be great. And what I found was not so much for the process of introducing myself to the community, but when I discovered the real service aspect of Rotary, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been missing for a
Yeah.
really long time. That
Wow.
because I want to do something, I almost felt like a little guilty that I haven't done enough. What can I do? And then meeting all these amazing people in the program and so on and so really kind of just inspired me, regardless of whether I had been on the school board or not, to do that. And that's really been the blessing, if you will, for the last 4 years, 3-4 years, for making that happen. So I felt great, but I really wish it had happened 15 plus years ago. I think I'd be even further along in my life if that had been the case.
It's interesting just hearing you share that and share how you wish it would have happened sooner. And I think that it's a testament of many individuals, not all, because as we know, not all individuals always stick it out with Rotary, but the overwhelming amount are like, where has this been all my life?
Well, I
And for
think,
some, they find it sooner, and for others,
yeah.
it's a little bit later.
Well, I also think it depends on, what your background is, what was modeled to you in terms of service,
Mm.
or what did service look like? Did it come from an organizational kind of model, or did it come from more individual kind of model? I actually did not grow up in an environment where there was a lot of organizational service, but my parents were literally the, second parents to so many people that they took under their wing and guided them to betterment and
Sure.
help and whatever. And I got to watch that most of my life. But I always wonder, like, well, why don't we do something in an organizational way? It's like, well, that's just not how we're wired. So I wasn't really modeled that in that environment. So I didn't naturally come from looking for that, I guess is what I would say. And it really wasn't until I got involved with the city and I got to see some other kind of things about the service of the community, then I started to realize, wow, there's organizational things that can be very impactful. How do I show up for that? And we live in a kind of a tight community in Edina. It's a weird kind of community in Edina sometimes. I mean, both the pluses and the minuses. But I think the vast majority of people are very good natured, very good hearted people that really do want to care for their fellow person, not just in Edina, but in the world. And where do they put their actions to power? And certainly Rotary is a great example of that
Mhm.
being done.
Well, Joe, you always say being a realtor, you recommend transplants to get involved.
All the time.
And that's a story.
Yeah.
The
I mean,
story he told really fits with what you've always said.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I do get that feedback a lot from clients. I'll follow up with them, a year later. They're like, "Yeah, it's tough to meet people here," and I'm like, "Yeah, that are
Yeah, so it is. That's-
Scandinavian, like tribal."
Yeah, it's true.
It also depends on kind of what your career is too, right?
Right.
So my wife and I, she worked for Cargill, I worked for Allianz in my first part of my career. We both were salespeople. We traveled. So before we had kids, we weren't here very often. We
Right.
were out doing stuff, and we would kind of laugh that, not that we didn't know our neighbors, but we didn't really know our neighbors because we weren't around very often. And it's kind of when you start to slowly change that part of stage of your life, if that's what your choice is, or when you have kids where you're going to be a little bit more kind of domiciled, then it's more like, oh, okay, how do we go on from there? And one of the plugs I would also make for today is that for transplants or new parents and so on and so forth, we were blessed with the fact that we joined the Edina Community Center's early childhood family education program, so ECFE, when my son was not even 3 months old. I was in transition of a job. My wife had been taking time off for the baby. And I was the dad who went to this group. So that was an oddity to begin with, being the father who did that. But oh my gosh, the program and the people you meet, both in the program, but also the other parents. So the moms that I met in the baby and me class, these are people that this is where community really started to happen in Edina for us, to where it kind of carried into how did service go on from there. Ironically, such to where I was at an event last night for someone, and the people who were running it were moms from ECFE that I've known for 12 or 13 years. And even though we don't necessarily see each other as often as we once did, the connection and the immediacy of like that old friend that you haven't seen in a long time, but you just pick up right where you left off.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. And so I find that level of community is really great. And I think that what I've found, honestly, in Rotary, even though it's a little bit of a different vibe, that with all the diversity that we have in Rotary in terms of what people do and what people are interested in, what they participate in, and so on and so forth, boy, you've got such phenomenal options for making that happen. That's really something that once you discover that, and if you're wired a certain way, that's something that lifts you up.
Yeah.
Boy, you're kind of hungry for that.
Yeah.
And whether that's going to the 7:30 Tuesday morning meeting, or whether that's going to an afternoon meeting, or
Service project. Yeah.
picking up
Yeah.
garbage on Highway 100 or whatever it is, it's that kind of connection is really great.
Yeah.
I agree. What do we have you here for? We're just sitting here
know.
talking like there's a theme, right? Like
Well, so you've joined Rotary, and the thing about Rotary is that there's almost instantaneously you're kind of enveloped into how can you serve through the Rotary, how can you be a part of a committee. And so what did that process look like for you to get you to the point where now you're the 2024 chairperson for Camp Enterprise?
Yeah. The committee structure when I first started was a little bit kind of fluid, I guess is probably the way I would say it. So Paul Nelson, who's been on like the vocational kind
Mhm.
of committee, and I think there's a committee that does sort of events like social events or things like that.
Mhm.
I got on the vocational one because it's where my business, my background is sort of being business. I was running businesses when I first started with Rotary, trying to help other people entrepreneurially or in their business vocation, try to kind of stimulate things from that standpoint. So we started with that. But the challenge is that you can talk in a meeting about something, but then actually carrying it forward into actually actions to where you can build it forward. That can be challenging because everyone's off doing their own thing and so on and so forth. So the committee structure in the first probably year and a half, I was technically on something, but I didn't necessarily participate as much. Or the things that we were trying to do, they happen at times that I could not
Mm.
really do it, if you will.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I got elected to the school board, and so I was really busy with that. And so I was kind of doing service projects, but not necessarily being actively kind of deeply engaged in a committee, is what I would
Sure.
honestly say. And it really wasn't until early last year, maybe a little bit more than that. I remember sitting in the small room at for the morning meeting, and I don't remember what happened, but like Mary just walked right over to me and said, "Hey, oh no, excuse me. The year before, I was gonna do Camp Enterprise. I was signed up to be something for Camp Enterprise. Well, it then turned out I think there was like a death in the family or something like that. And whenever it was, I then couldn't be there, and so I had to back out. I felt really bad that I had committed and then I couldn't do it. So I felt a little bit kind of maybe bad about that. I think Mary held on to that knowledge, and
She's a bear trap.
then she came to me one morning a while back and said, "Hey, I know you didn't get to participate with Camp Enterprise last year, but this year, we really need a co-chair and blah 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 blah." It's like you don't even have to do a whole lot. You're just kind of like paying attention, learning what's going on, but you don't have to do a whole lot. Would you be willing to do that? But it then means you're going to take over the chairmanship the following year. And I think we all know that when Mary asks you to do something, it's kind of hard to say no to her because she's
Yeah.
such an amazing person and everything she does for the club is so amazing. I have a long history with her being back at the city. We have a kind of a funny relationship where she fired me from the commission because I missed too many meetings. It was a fluke thing. And then when I came back, because everyone said, no, you need to come back, I then had to go through the interview process, and I'm sitting across from the people who interview, and Mary's at the table, and her only question to me was like, you had a problem with attendance before. Would that be a problem going forward? and I
Well,
said,
to Joe's point, she's a bear trap, right?
yeah,
doesn't
she
look
really
right.
is. But in like kind of like a
Yes.
fur bear trap, right? Like
Yes.
it's not going to cause blood, but
Firm but nurturing.
exactly. So I think in my mindset of that I wanted to do more, I hadn't been able to find what was the right way to do more. This kind of came up. I felt a little guilty about it. And then I said, okay, let's do it. And then what was really great was then last year with Rob from the Noon Club who was chairing it, he didn't necessarily ask me to like get my hands super dirty. He just like wanted me to kind of mirror him on the process. He was so great by letting me come in and listen and watch, and I got a little input. But then I chose to at last year's event. I became a mentor. So a mentor is a key role at Camp
Yeah.
Enterprise where you're actually there for the 3 days with the students. You're head of a student group and you're basically coaching them. And coaching is one of the things I really love to do. I'm a coach in soccer for rec soccer. I've coached other things. And so it was a really great experience. So not only was the co-chair last year, but I decided I wanted to have the full immersed experience of being a mentor so I could really understand what it is that the program's really trying to do. And by doing that, that only didn't reinforce that, okay, yeah, being the chair is probably a good idea because I got to see the amazing impact that it had. And now it's just a matter of carrying forward this year, executing the program to make that happen. So it's kind of funny how you stumble into things
Yeah.
that you don't know.
Well, and for those that don't know, can you explain a little bit what Camp Enterprise is, how it works?
Yeah. So Camp Enterprise is an entrepreneurial program for high school juniors and seniors here in Minnesota. So for both districts 5950 and 5960, they collaborate on that and all the clubs that are a part of those two districts. It's been around almost 50 years. It actually started in Alexandria way back when. And the Edina Club, I think, took it over within the first 10 years because of our scale and our ability to kind of manage and finance and do certain kind of things. And so we've been running it almost probably not quite 40 years. It basically invites anywhere between 80 to 100 juniors and seniors to come to a 3-day course where they get put into groups, anywhere from 8 to 12 students, and they have a case study that they're going to work on an entrepreneurial venture to make a presentation to kind of like a Shark Tank, where venture capitalists who have $5 million to spend, and you're trying to win the competition for the best idea and how you're going to execute what that program is. And the amazing thing about the program is these students don't know each other at all before they start. They're completely, new to each other. Most of them don't know anything about what it means to be a C-suite role. So being a CEO or CFO or COO or whatever it is, they have to assign their roles to each other, not with any input from us. Then they have to work the problem to figure out what ideas do they want to do, come up with the plan, come up with the presentation, and then who's going to do what to then try to make that happen. And all of that happens really within about a 48-hour period from start to finish. And the most amazing thing is you're there on the first day where everyone's getting to know each other and so on and so forth. And you're like, okay, time is ticking on. When are they going to get this done? And you're thinking like, there's no way this is going to happen. Everyone says this. If you're new to it, I was the same way. There's no way. They're not. I mean, they don't even know 2 + 2 in this sort of situation. But with the mentor, with the programming that we have, with the speakers, with the exercises that we do, it gives them the tools necessary for them to come to what that is. And what I found the most amazing part last year is that, as in any group of human beings, you have people who are very eager and some who are kind of held back. And the people who hold back think that they need to process a little longer for the information. And to be honest with you, in my group, it happened to be the girls, the high school girls in my group that were that way. But within a day, who was the ones who were taking over? The ones who had a time to process what was going on, to think about what we needed to do rather than just reacting. It was they who then became the leader. Even though they weren't the CEOs in the group, they were the ones who led the program, and all collaboratively together were able to make things happen. And you saw that across all the 10 or 12 groups that we had. So a phenomenal experience, first for the students, and you talk about what their takeaways are about how they didn't realize they could do something like this. They appreciated all the knowledge that was provided to them, but then the practical exercise of doing this was really great. But then you hear just as many, if not better, responses from the adults who then were providing the support for the program. Now they were blown away by what these kids are doing. When you hear the venture capitalists talk about the presentations and the ideas and so on and so forth, it really is an amazing kind of thing. So the cool thing is it's about 80 to 120 students from the schools. We ask clubs to sponsor the students. So any clubs in the district, they can sponsor 1 to 5, could be more than that. It costs about $450 per student because the students don't pay for anything. And then we do this out at Camp Courage, which is out in Maple Lake. So it's like about an hour and 20 minutes from the Twin Cities. We actually pull students from all the way out northwest of Alexandria, all the way down to Rochester and anywhere in between, even part of Western Wisconsin. We bust them in and make that happen. And we have amazing speakers. We typically have about 7 speakers in the program that all have different elements that they're trying to bring to help educate the kids on leadership, on how to work together, on strategy, on marketing, on different kind of things, so they can utilize those knowledges in their case study development.
It's so cool.
Sounds like something everybody should go through.
I know.
Well, you know what's the coolest thing is that there were some speakers who came who they themselves went through the program.
Oh, sure. It's old enough, right? Like, yeah.
35 years ago.
Okay.
They were students like 30 some odd years ago who have become successful in whatever they've done, and they've come back as Rotarians or maybe they're not even Rotarians, but they went through the program because it so impacted their kind of vision of their future and how it played out.
Sure.
They were some of the best speakers to where they could relate specifically to what the students' experiences were.
What does your process look like for procuring those speakers?
So we have 2 people from the club, one from the noon club and one from the morning club, who have kind of been responsible for going out and finding speakers. It's really trying to find along certain topic lines.
Okay.
What are the kind of from a curriculum standpoint, what are the areas that we want someone to be able to talk about? So like last year, for instance, we had a very early on speaker who talked about the personality traits of people and how dynamic teams come together, understand how different people process, communicate, and care about different things. There was a whole speaker presentation that did that. And that was perfect because that was at the very early stages when the students were just starting to get to know one another and they had to identify who was going to play what role within the organization that they were creating. Understanding those different personality traits was critically important for them to figure out, oh, how they might approach dealing with the differences within their group. Because again, they have no experience with the individuals that they're playing with. They had to go from there. That was really brilliant. We had a speaker who ran a nonprofit and was talking about how, the business, even though it's a nonprofit, you still have to run a nonprofit
Yeah.
like a for-profit business.
Mhm.
And your mission and your vision, it can be for great purpose like a nonprofit, but they'll still have to be able to execute kind of the business plan from that standpoint. And they talked about the pluses and minuses of relating to that part of it. There were some marketing people who talked about when you think about your market in terms of your customers, your vendors, your partners, whatever it is, how do you want to work with that and how you go from there? There was somebody, I believe last year, that was really about people management, right? So if you run a business, any size business, people are both your greatest asset, but they're also one of your greatest challenges.
Hmm.
How do you kind of work from that standpoint? And then there was other parts. There was one other thing that we've had, I think, year over year, where it gives them a protocol for you to develop an entrepreneurial, like kind of operating system mindset of how you go about coming up with certain things. It gives them kind of a toolkit to kind of walk through so that they had some things they could grab onto while they're figuring out what they wanted to do. So there were things of that nature. But the main thing is really trying to make sure it's engaging to the students and gives them something to think about, taps into their curiosity, and gives them some sort of skill set that they can work through as the collaborative to come up with their presentation.
So neat.
What does the club sponsor the students? When does that start? Are all the students already in from last year, or does it start once the school year starts?
Yeah, it starts for the new students. It's going to start. It starts now, but it'll really kick off when school starts. So I've been working on getting the proper list of every high school in the two districts. Because one of the challenges when we're really we have to first recruit the clubs because we need the clubs to financially support. Say yes, we're going to provide one sponsorship or two sponsorship, whatever it might be, and then if they have a student that they know of, maybe it's a student from one of their club members or in their community, great. But a lot of times they don't actually have a connection to a high school student in their area or whatever it is. And so they're oftentimes looking for assistance as to, well, how do I want to support this? I'm willing to sponsor, but I don't actually have somebody. One of my goals this year is to actually help them with that process. So I have a little bit more connections because of my school background to kind of work with the principals and the counselors at the identified schools within the districts that we can then help marry people together so that we can find the students from that standpoint. We already actually have a few students who've already signed up. They've already worked out with their club. Yep. They've connected already and I've already received some registrations, but the real push is now going out and communicating to all of it's about 130 clubs that make up the two districts, getting them to understand the program, understand the cost implications. We've had about anywhere between 50 to 65 clubs year over year that have provided sponsorships for students. We'd like them to do that again. We would love to get more and even if they can't fully sponsor a student, maybe they provide some dollars towards it, which can either go towards the sponsorship of a student. But also one of the things that the students are working towards is that we offer 5 $1,000 scholarships to the students that perform the best. Not that their presentation or their project wins, but that we grade them on 3 different key characteristics of their participation and what they've done. So they get evaluations from their own team, they get evaluations from the venture capitalists, they get evaluations from the mentor and the counselors that are there. That the kids who then display the kind of core values and the experiences in those 3 categories, if they're selected, then they win $1,000 scholarship. We would love to have support for those scholarships as well. So there's a couple different ways in which clubs can participate. I'm trying to broaden that out this year because before it was only either sponsor a student or don't. There's not really an avenue for you to go. Well, there are some Rotary clubs that are small. They don't have those kind of finances and so on and so forth. But if they give $100 towards the $5,000 bucket of scholarships, that goes a long way to helping us achieve what our goal is. So that's what's starting now. So we have a marketing team that's working on identifying and reaching out to the clubs now. And then we'll start working on the reach out to the schools probably towards the end of this month as schools start to come back into session. They'll have that at both the principal and counselors at those high schools to be able to make that happen.
Are you guys engaging the Interact and Rotaract clubs as well?
Yes,
Okay.
that
Yeah, because I figured
not
that's like a
yeah,
bridge,
not
right?
every school, of course, has
Right.
those. So yes, those are a natural connection from that standpoint. So it's definitely trying to work with that, but then also when those don't exist or they're not as strong, how do we then find? Because there's other things like DECA and there's other business sort of entrepreneurial things that maybe there's a club within a high school that's
What
doing
is it?
something like that.
What was it? Is it BPA? BPA, business profession. B.
Not 100% sure on
Okay.
that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
but I remember doing something as a high schooler where
Yeah.
it was like a business piece of it.
DECA for us.
It was a long time ago. I don't remember.
The cool thing is that what I would say is it's really finding any junior, senior who wants to broaden their horizons. Even if their goal is not to necessarily be in business, this isn't all just about business. This is literally about how do you work within a team? How do you problem solve? These are like life skills that are great for business, certainly entrepreneurial and go on from there. But it's also when you just think about what Rotary is about, right? Service. This is where you can develop the skills necessary for you to work on problem solving service things both in your community and abroad to go from that standpoint and realize that this is what Rotary is about. So the one thing that Camp Enterprises is also really meant to do is to give young students an introduction to Rotary so they can see the value proposition that Rotary has and what it actually does and why it's impactful in that way for them to maybe consider this, whether not now, but certainly in their near future, that, wow, Rotary is an organization that they might want to be about.
Have you guys ever tried to flip the engineering of that and just procure as many students as you can? And then Rotary's really good at answering bells and going, hey, we've got 350 students. We need to raise, I don't know,
Raise the funds.
do the funds that way. Because I feel like what's interesting is you're trying to raise the fund and then find the kid. Now I'm not questioning it.
Yeah,
It's just really fascinating because it actually works. I mean, especially what's really cool about this show is that we're exposed to kind of how Rotary gets stuff done. And it always seems like Rotary goes, hey, here's a big giant problem, sets it right in the middle of the table and goes, okay, we got to fix it using nothing but that. And then they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my goal about finding the students, which is what I'm personally focused on in my role this year, is along those lines that, ideally we kind of cap it out that we think the program will be most successful with a maximum of 120 students.
Got it.
So if we get to 120 students, boy, that'd be awesome. We were just under 100 last year. We've had, it's kind of ebbed and flowed. Obviously, COVID didn't happen and so on and so forth. But there have been as high as close to 120 a few years back, and there's been as low as like 80 something or whatever. Now, I think that 100 to 120 is probably the most optimal because you want to have teams that have about 8 to 10, no more than 12 students per team. So they'll have their own functions of what they're doing. And it's easier for them to kind of interact. If you have huge teams, it's more complicated. So to me, if you had 120 students and you had 10 teams of, or 12 teams of 10, I mean, that would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
The challenge is that in order to make Camp Enterprise successful with whatever students we have, you then have to have a mentor for every team. And that's a 3-day commitment. The Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I didn't say this, but Camp Enterprise this year is October 31st through November 2nd at Camp Courage. And yes, it's on Halloween, but get over that. It's just the way the schedule kind of worked out. But I think actually
there'll be candy there.
I think it could be fun for the kids. I mean, these are high schoolers. They're not on a Thursday. They're not really probably doing something for Halloween.
Right.
And they can get back on Saturday evening to then go out and party or whatever they want to do. But
Michael's like just being realistic here. So
I am a dad of teenagers, so yes, I try to speak from experience. So being a mentor for the 3 days, which is a critically important role to play, but asking someone within our construct to give up Thursday, Friday, Saturday to go do that, that's a big ask. And that's where I find, even to your point, Joe, that where we just solve problems, like I think sometimes we think, well, we can only solve it at the last minute as opposed to very proactively, meaning, I need volunteers, both not only for mentoring, but for the marketing of contacting people, working, finding students, working on a couple other things. And while messages have gone out, there haven't been as many. And I'm not guilting anyone. It's just the nature of things because Rotary's doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always.
Always.
Right. In our morning club, right. We had the golf tournament. We've had the rides program. We did tons of stuff that we were successful doing. It was awesome, whatever it is. But that's where people are putting their energy. So things don't rise to people's consciousness until it's way further down the line. And I get that. That's human nature. And there's no problem with that. But in order to make Camp Enterprise successful, you have to have enough human beings that are going to actually do some of the work to make that happen. So for me, I would love to have booked 120 students and then we figure out how to make it work.
Right.
If I could do that, I'm working towards that goal. But in the meantime, it's sort of like the hard part for the clubs is that if they haven't really budgeted for the money, the 450 or whatever it is, and now it's an outlier to that sort of thing, that's something they have to work through in their internal, whatever it is. But I'm also really wanting the clubs themselves to not just think of themselves as a money sponsor.
Right.
I really want them to participate because here's the thing, guys. Okay. For as good and bad as Edina is, right? Do we have a monopoly on all the good ideas or the best approaches
Definitely
to these
not.
kind of things? No. So if you're in, Hutchinson, or if you're in,
Prior Lake.
Prior Lake or Stillwater or whatever, right? You're a business person, or whatever it is. Your experience is added value to make sure that we have enough diversity of experience to where the kids, because they're all coming from very diverse backgrounds themselves, can we marry that up? And the hard part is that I think oftentimes within the districts, this is seen as an Edina program. And my evolution of what I'd like it to be is really it's a district program.
Well, that's what it should be,
It really should be. And that even though the Edina groups are kind of driving it, I would like to see it more dispersed out from a driving standpoint to other parts of the districts to be able to make that happen.
Let's play with it. I want to stress
yeah.
test this for a
Sure.
second, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Really quick. I want to stress test this. Okay. So what it sounds like is, this program's been around for a long time. We took it over. The Edina program took it over 40 years
Something
ago.
like that, yeah.
Okay. So where's the disruption that needs to happen in that? In one, is it optimally structured and working the way that it should? And yes, probably it's working good enough. But it sounds like from this conversation, we always like to have things be better and adapt and align with the skill set of Rotary, right? Like this doesn't seem like a program that aligns with the skill set of, I don't mean just Edina, I mean Rotary versus, so if everything is kind of getting spearheaded from the Edina clubs, and then kind of the procurement is like, please clubs sponsor, okay, we've got one, now we can bring a student in. It would just be so fascinating to just put a ton of stress on the district and go, because you talk about immediacy, right?
Yeah.
Well, make it real immediate and go, hey, this doesn't happen if people don't step up. And Rotary is like this. You put a problem in the middle of the table, you go, we have to solve this like right now. And 3 people step up and it happens.
Yes.
And it works. And you just wonder if there's something to that. It's an act of courage for sure, because you're gonna fight some real big tail or headwinds with a substantiated program, right? So
yeah, I think
fun to
I think for me it's I'm going to be reaching out. I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with names, but our new district governor, Sharon. Thank you. Yes. She came to our club a couple weeks ago and so on and so forth. And
she's been on the show too.
Yeah, great. And she seems phenomenal. And so I was talking to Tom Gump about this and whatever. And I'm definitely gonna reach out to her to talk about some things along these lines. Dick Crockett has also talked about from how is this actually structured, under which foundation is this actually structured? And Dick and I were talking about this a few weeks back. He's like, there could be a pathway for which this could be kind of reformulated to where it's under the district foundation as opposed to the Edina Foundation, which would then get into what you're talking about. But that, of course, he has to go through the process and you got to go. So I think that would be one of the catalysts, right? That says how you then broaden this out into being, instead of just an Edina program, how does it become a really Rotary program? I think that'd be number one. But number two is, I think in anything, it's what's the value proposition? There has to be a connected value proposition to the clubs within the district.
Right.
as to why is this important, and without it being a complaint or anything negative towards that, different clubs are going to have different value propositions that they put on that. And so it's in that transition, if you could find a transition, can you get everyone to collaboratively agree, yes, this is what's really important, this is what we're doing, and so on and so forth. I know there's another program that's entrepreneurial. The name escapes me at the moment. I think that the 5960 district does, where it's not entrepreneurial like we do, but they do a different kind of thing. It's more expensive and so on and so forth, and they get a certain number of clubs to do that. I've had clubs talk to me like, well, how is this different than this program? We
Mm.
already sponsor this program, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, coming back to what are the values of Rotary, how are we, impacting the community and the future of the world and our societies? What are those meaningful things? And if you pick one or the other, that's fine. But then how do you then make from a district level, hey, here are these avenues that you can go down, pick one.
Yeah.
Make sure you're at least doing one, from that standpoint, because that's where you have that standpoint.
As we're kind of bumping up against
Sure.
time, do you have a vision, or I should say, has a vision been shared with you, or do you have a vision of what Camp E looks like in 5-10 years?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's a vision. I don't think I've gone that far with it, but for me, along the lines we just were talking about, is I would love to see it in 5 years' time to where it is a district level or program that district level and leadership of the clubs that make up those districts have poured in not just the money resource, because that oftentimes finds its way to take care of itself, although we still need that. So please don't think that it's not the case. But it's treated like, um, you know, the most important programs in the district for when we do the foundation funding for polio, or we do for water, or we whatever those things are, that you treat it in the same vein of importance, because this is really about the future of Rotary. And I think that there aren't many ways in which we can tap into future citizens through Rotary that will eventually pay us dividends in terms of what they're able to do. This is one of these ways in which we capture them in a very kind of unique and impactful way, which is 3 days, that they walk away from that as they're getting ready to go into college
Yeah.
to do something with that.
Well,
So,
and Rotary already has a model that does that, and that's youth exchange.
Right.
And what percentage of members are youth exchange students?
Right.
Like, so to your point of going like scaling the same thing, I mean, it's just another touch.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
important.
Well, I would be curious as to how many kids who've gone through Camp B eventually participate in youth exchange,
Right?
and if that would be the vision to get them that broader experience outside of their home area, what would that then do?
Look at that.
So
What a
that could be
great
part of the
idea.
vision.
That's fun.
What a great
That's
idea.
fun.
You're talking about some of the speakers at the last year when you're there that went through it. Some are Rotarians, but I think that's a way to convey that message that now it's not a 5-year-old project. You can see exactly the impact it's had,
Mhm.
which helps tell the story to clubs. And when you
Yeah.
go to the district level, you bring some of those people on board as a marketer.
Well, I think to that point is, whenever I hear the speeches and the presentations that we get at club about these organizations that we're supporting and the impact they've had in whatever project they've done somewhere, I find personally that when you realize that your money, effort, time, whatever you did, actually created an end result that is the desired
Yeah.
thing that you want, makes it tangible.
Yep.
Yeah.
That makes, I think, you lean in more into why you do this.
Yep.
I think
So
if it's
true.
just about you giving money and you don't really know what impact that you feel good about, maybe you give the money or whatever it is, but you never actually really feel the tangible outcome. It's think about it this way. It's like if you were a parent and all you did was provide the financial resources to the kid, but you had nothing to do or not any indication of what the outcome was going to be, how would you feel about that? Like, okay, I did my part, but I didn't really have the impact,
Mm.
or I couldn't measure my impact.
Yep.
With these things, I think that's important. So I think maybe the vision is really trying to, how do we correlate the impact? And you're right, sometimes it's hard. You can't measure that until down the road. But it would be interesting if you could track these people and their pathways. How did this impact them?
Yeah.
Mhm.
and even if they don't even come back to Rotary, but it impacted them to be service minded and doing stuff.
Isn't that the same thing?
That's still the same
Right.
thing, because it doesn't matter whether you're a Rotarian or not. It'd be awesome if you were, but if you take that forward and make that part of who you are, that's where it goes. And I think
Yeah.
that's really, if I were to leave people with the note of what the impact of Camp E can be, it can do that.
Yeah.
And even though I don't have explicit data that says that, I can tell you from talking to the students from the time you start with them on the Thursday to the time they leave you on the Saturday afternoon, and you see what they write.
Hmm.
Yeah, because they
There's
write it.
parallel programs that support something very similar that we do have data on. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's things that you can kind of go, okay, I can see the correlation between these two programs, and yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And work on the model to collect the data in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the hard part
We've
is
given you a lot to do on this.
No,
Yeah.
I'm sure
Well,
you
I
You'll
think
have to listen back, take your notes, and
I
go
think
to
that
the drawing table.
I think the challenge is that going back to something you said earlier, is that my vision also is we need to update how we do this program to meet the kids where they are.
Yeah.
So with all due respect to our colleagues who are even older than I am, they're doing paper, not electronic app driven, whatever it
Yeah.
is, because the kids, everything they're going to do is on their phone.
Yep.
If you're not
Mhm.
giving it to them in that way, your ability to connect to them or to efficiently do stuff
Right.
becomes more challenging. Well, the problem is if you don't have the resource within our construct of a web developer or an app developer or whatever it is who could take the simple things we want to do, then it's that piecemeal part.
Yep.
And that's
Sure.
really where then it's not as efficient.
This was awesome.
This was really
Yeah.
great. Michael, thank you for coming on. Before we wrap up, can you share with our listeners how people can get involved?
Yes. So there is the Camp Enterprise website that I can give you guys a link to. You can go there and you can actually register as a club. You can register as a student. There's registration for volunteers. When you see emails from Camp Enterprise, Camp E Rotary from me or from Brent Lindell, who is the co-chair from the Noon Club, when we're asking for volunteers, whatever it is, if you can just schedule some amount of time that you could help with that, that'd be great. We need more
Mhm.
volunteers on the front end before we get to the camp. That would be really great. And then third would be like what Joe's trying to do, be outside the box thinking
Mm.
as to how can we connect with the students who we want to serve, because that's what we're about. The whole program works. It's not about making money or breaking even in that from that standpoint. We'd like to, but it's really about how do we find the students and make that happen. The more students we
Yeah.
can find and support and provide that service to, we fulfill our mission of what we're trying to
Mhm.
accomplish.
Create
So
momentum.
exactly.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Well, thank you, Michael. It was such an honor to have you on here and hear a little bit more about Can Enterprise. And thanks, everybody. I'm your host, Kelly Kirk.
I'm Joe Kirk.
And I'm Chad Larson. We'll be back.